Since 2002, the United States has had the highest incarceration rate in the world, at around 0.8% of the US population and 22% of the world's population, according to the International Center for Prison Studies. One can only ask, exactly what's one of the biggest reasons why this is happening?
Back in the mid-1990s, Hillary Rodham Clinton and her husband, then President William Jefferson Clinton, put forward what has come to be known as the Crime Bill of 1994. Specifically, this bill is referred to as the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994. And it is this legislation in particular that fueled the rise of mass incarceration from the 1990s to the present day.
Judges now had less of a discretion to put individuals for, let's say, a range of time. Like for burglary, for example, you had the judges, based on what happened, on their situation, on the individual, whether they had priors or not, they had kids, they could put them in prison from 1 to 5 years. Well, that was no longer the case after we went into a determinate sentencing, more mandatory sentencing minimums, where now the judges, for burglary, now you had a determinate sentencing. That means that instead of the 1 to 5 years, you had to give them 5 years, regardless of whether they had kids, mitigated circumstances, the role in the crime. There was no leeway for the judge to decide whether he could give them 1 to 5. Now that person had to go into 5 years.
Under the Constitution, you technically enjoy certain rights as a criminal defendant, but the practical reality is the prosecutor has all the advantages at the moment. There needs to be reform. Until that is done, there's no hope for criminal justice reform.
Though there's much work to be done in the justice system, Dr. Smith suggests that the simple elements of life should be focused on in order to prevent prison occupation in the first place.
One of the things that worked in the past, individuals were getting breakfast in like the elementary school, middle school, and high school. And so you would come in and you would get, breakfast, because they started finding out that kids that were from lower socioeconomic status were coming in, they were hungry, and in turn, they weren't able to concentrate in the classroom, that they were deemed as disruptive students, which then would lead them into a path of suspension, and then it would lead them to all sorts of negative outcomes after that.
Now that someone has made their way out of prison, it can be hard to find a job, especially if they must mention in an application that they have a criminal background. Mark Maurer, Executive Director of the Sentencing Project, fights for these people to have a better chance for reemployment.
Many jurisdictions, cities, and states have adopted ban-the-box policies over the last decade or so, and it's very encouraging to see the level of support. I think it's still too early to know exactly what the impact is. There haven't been very many academic studies that look at what difference that can make. We know anecdotally that before the policy came into effect, far too many employers would just take an application where the box was checked and toss it in the wastebasket. So at the very least, we know that at least some people are getting the opportunity to be called back for an interview, and at that point, if the question comes up, do you have a felony record, then there's an opportunity to explain what the record is, how long ago it was, what's happened since you were convicted, to try to make the case that not only do you have the job skills, but your felony conviction shouldn't stand in the way of employment.
We must all try to empathize with the plight of our fellow man, even if that individual differs from you in terms of their ethnicity, their race, their gender, etc., etc. We've got to try to hold on to our soul and our humanity. That's what this issue is about. It's about caring about others, not because you have a stake in it, but because they're there, because they exist, because they're your fellow human beings, and because you want to safeguard your own soul.